Okay, in the last video we left off with the fact that we had created a bank account and a little tester program, and we saw that the bank account executed correctly. I am now going to introduce you to something called JUnit testing, and we will make available this handout. But JUnit testing is where you create tiny little mini test cases for every method that's in your classes, and for also testing whether an object, you can also test to see if an object was created by testing against null. But the idea is that if you correctly design your test cases and then you develop what's called a test suite, then you can always run that test suite to do what's called regression testing. So here are some of the basics, okay? And so we are going to create a bank account, which you already did. And then we're going to, and actually when you create a bank account, I didn't necessarily do this, but this is something that you should be aware of, and it's often an interview question, and that is, how do you set up what's called a POJO? And a POJO is just a plain old Java object. It's a basic class used to create objects, but it's also useful when using advanced topics. To create a POJO, you set up a default no argument constructor. That's the constructor that we created back here in the bank account right here, where the instance fields are not initialized. It is, and that's what makes it what they call a no argument constructor. All the instance variables are private, and then you would get public getter and setter methods. Now, we technically did not have the set balance method, but that's going to be okay for our case. To create a POJO for the bank account, this is what we did, and we did all of those methods except for the toString method. So we need to go back and write a toString method in order to test this, or we should in order to create an official POJO object. At this point I might not do that right now, just to show you how to get a basic JUnit test created. We also create a default no default constructor, and that constructor consumes one parameter. And now, in order to start our JUnit testing, in order to create a JUnit test, and I'm going to step through this, you need to highlight the bank account, or excuse me, the class that you want to create a JUnit test for. You right click, add a new JUnit test. Please notice up here at the top you have some options. I believe that right now you can choose Jupyter or JUnit 4. I'm going to click on JUnit 4. It already fills in the bank account test or the bank account class because we were selected on that class. Hit next. And then you can decide which methods do you want to write tests for. So to start with, I'm only going to test the deposit class. We can go back and change that later. So when I go to this, code is automatically set up. It automatically imports the correct JUnit assertion classes. And the assertion classes are, or the assertion methods, are what we use to actually write the tests. If I scroll down on this document, at the very end are JUnit assertion methods. These methods return a true or a false or a Boolean value, or sometimes it can return a message if you tell it to return a message. But you'll want to become familiar with these. And the asserting null tests to see that if a method fails, or it can also test to see if an object is null. You have the identical test that checks to see if two objects are actually identical. Remember that using the double equals operator doesn't check that they're equal, but it checks to see if they are actually itself. And so it asserts to see if they are the same, and it says it uses the double equal operator rather than the equals method to compare them. The difference is that the two objects have the same state, might be equal to each other, but not double equal, because the double equal means that it's equal to itself. But that would be down the road using that. So those are your assertion methods, and we are going to set up an assertion method in order to test our code. When we first open that up, the code that's in there has included a default fail method, and we're going to run it, and you're going to see a screen pop up that looks like this. If I try to run this right now, it's going to fail. It's going to fail because the method has not been implemented. So it is automatically set up that way to get a red over here. And right now, that's good because we're not testing anything. It should fail. So red is actually a good thing because you are finding the errors in your code. But we want to go ahead and write a method to test the deposit. And so in class, you've heard me talk about all the time predicting your output. And so this is also basically a fancy desk check is what I would call it also. So for example, we want to deposit 100. And so if I think of it this way, if I deposit $100, then I would expect the balance to be 100. And that's what I'm going to test. I've already written some of that code. I'm going to copy it in and then we're going to have to explain it. So get back to my Package Explorer, open up the code that I have pre-written, and I'm going to copy it over. And then I will talk you through what this does. So the bank account test is the JUnit test. We are going to delete the failed test because we're going to write our own. I'm going to paste in the information that I already had copied over. And here's what we're going to take a look at. This one's a little bit more complicated maybe than some, and for the following reason. And that's because we have to compare against epsilon. So first of all though, you create a new bank account object. Please notice that it's using the noargs constructor. That way we know that there aren't any predefined values that are set. We know it's blank. It's a clean slate. So we have to use that first. Next, because we are comparing doubles, we have to set up an epsilon value here. And then I'm going to take my bank account, which is test. That's the object I created. I'm going to deposit $100. And so I'm going to expect the balance to be 100. But we know when we compare doubles, we always have to check to see if the difference between the values, the $100 that I deposited and my balance, is basically small enough to be negligible or less than epsilon. So I calculated the difference between the values. I'm going to take the absolute value of that and I'm going to check to see if it's less than epsilon. Now I'm using the assert true method, and basically what that does is if the value that is inside the parens here evaluates to true, that's what I want, then I'm going to get a green on my unit test. So in order to actually run the unit test, I just need to go back and execute it after I comment out this line of code. So I'm on the unit test, I'm going to execute that unit test, and I should get a green on my JUnit test. And there it is. I just tested successfully that my expected value of 100 was actually 100. So that's your introduction to unit testing. What would happen is you should also think about, well, what happens if I were to test the withdrawal method. So in order to test the other methods, I can just start to do the same thing here. I'm going to copy this code and I'm going to paste it here. And it's important to understand that each one of these is its own individual unit. So just because I have a deposit test here, it's going to have no effect on the withdrawal. And so I'm going to test withdrawal. Well, actually, I need to deposit money, so I have money in there to withdraw. Then I'm going to test withdrawal. And let's say I withdraw $25.25. I have my method name incorrect here, so let's just try withdrawal. And now this, I wanted to review how to use epsilon, so that's why I used that on the first test. And actually I commented out the section of code up there. I did make some other changes, so let's look at the changes that I made. If I uncomment this, I wanted to comment this out, so I highlighted it and I can go to edit or source and I can add a block comment to comment that whole thing out. We needed to add the ampersand test. You have to have that in there in order to run the JUnit tests. And so since I was typing this one individually, I did not use the predefined template. I needed to add @test. and then we have the withdrawal method that we are testing. And so now we're back to, I want to make a deposit and I'm going to withdraw. But using the epsilon here, it can get a little bit cumbersome. I wanted to review it with you. But the other thing to keep in mind is if I go ahead and try assert, and I'm going to type in, I want to pull up all of my pre-built commands. So I did a control spacebar. If I start to look at then all of these methods in here, I have a variety of assert statements that I can use. And if I start to look, there's an assert equals for doubles, I believe, right here. And it includes, I'm going to use that. And that's actually assert arrays equal, which is not what I want. So let's try this again. Assert, control spacebar. I don't want assert array. I just want assert equals. So assert equals, I'm going to use that one, and it wants me to put in the message, and the message would be a message that returns if it fails. And so I could say withdraw failed if I wanted to. The expected value is going to be my $100 minus $25.25. Now I could go ahead and calculate that mentally, but I might make a mistake, so I like to just go ahead and say it's going to be my $100 minus $25.25. Actually, what would be better is if I were to get the balance that's in there, which should be the 100 and minus 25.25, and then I want to check to see if that's actually equal to the balance. Actually, let me back up because I've already made the withdrawal, so that's not going to be true. So it does have to be 100 minus 25.25. Then I want to take my test and I want to get the balance. And then this delta is your tolerance. So what difference do we want to be acceptable is epsilon. So it's going to do basically these two little segments of code for us. And so if it fails, then it'll be red. If it passes, it'll be green. So let's go ahead and try this out. Make sure that I'm on the account test and I run the code, and we're going to see if we get a green value. So that shows green, just to show that if it was wrong, I'm going to put in another value here. So that's the wrong value. It's not 25.25. And I go ahead and execute. I should now get a red, and somewhere it should give me an error message. I don't know where it actually prints those error messages that the withdrawal failed, but that feature is available. All right, so it's red, it failed. So if I go back in and I do 25.25, and since I don't know where that error message shows up right now, I can just use 3 arguments on this particular one. I don't have to use that message. It's an optional thing. And if I execute this, we should get back to a green test. And there we are. So that introduces you to JUnit testing. It introduces you to how to use the built-in, control spacebar, your IntelliSense, in order to pull up some of those methods, etc. And it also verifies for us that, in this case, that our withdrawal method and our deposit method are working for the bank account superclass. We still have not gotten to the subclasses. We will take a look at doing that next.